Thank you, Charlotte. All right, let's set my coffee somewhere I can get to it. I don't like it on the canted podium here. Well, good morning. I'm author Michael Overhola, and I'd like to welcome you all to our presentation on exploring the Bermuda Triangle, one of the most famous and mysterious places on Earth. I'm glad to see some familiar and friendly faces in our audience today. So thank you for some of you who have come back after the first presentation, and to some of you who I've spoken with over the last few days for coming to see what we're going to be talking about today. We did, in case any of you all did not know this, probably most of you did, we did actually sail through the western edge of the Bermuda Triangle at the beginning of this cruise, and I'm pleased that we did not suffer any apparent mishaps as a result, and ideally, we won't on our return voyage either. All right, the Bermuda Triangle is a big place, and we're only going to be able to explore a little bit of it today, so let's jump right into it. And once we've finished with the structured portion of our presentation, we should have a few minutes for questions and answers. If you ask me about shopping opportunities in the Bermuda Triangle, I won't be able to answer your questions any more than I would be able to answer your questions about shopping opportunities anywhere, because I don't know anything about shopping. Mostly what I know is about history and maritime history. But I'll do my best to answer any questions. And then I'm usually propping up one of the bars sometime in the evening, either before or after dinner. So if you see me and you have any questions, you can certainly feel free to approach me and ask. So I tend to be approachable. All right. The Bermuda Triangle, also frequently known as the Devil's Triangle, is a legendary area in the Atlantic Ocean that has purportedly been the location of many vanished surface vessels, aircraft, and people. Mariners' tales associated with the triangle extend back in time more than 5 centuries. The first article about the legend of the triangle appeared in a newspaper in 1950, and the first use of the term Bermuda Triangle was probably in another article in 1955. So really, the origins of that name are relatively recent. They're post-World War II. Chances are 100 years ago, nobody would know what you were talking about if you said the Bermuda Triangle. So it's a relatively new term for an area that has had an ominous reputation for about 500 years. Many of these disappearances involve a level of mystery that has been popularly explained by a variety of theories that go beyond mere human error or acts of nature attributed to wrecks and disappearances in other parts of the world. Such explanations have, in fact, increasingly, for any of you who watch late-night television on the science or history channels, have increasingly involved the paranormal, a suspension of the laws of physics, and even activity by extraterrestrial beings. So this area is, in fact, one of the most heavily traveled shipping lanes in the world, with ships crossing through it daily, bound for ports in Europe, the Americas, and the Caribbean. Cruise ships like this one are also plentiful, and pleasure craft regularly go back and forth between Florida and the islands. It is also a heavily flown route for commercial and private aircraft heading to and from Florida, the Caribbean, and South America. Okay, the traditional area of the Bermuda Triangle, as you can see, has its points at the mid-Atlantic island of Bermuda in the north, at Miami, Florida in the west, and at San Juan, Puerto Rico in the southeast. So we pretty much ran right along the southern edge of it on our way out on this cruise. Most of the incidents associated with the triangle have in fact been concentrated along the southern boundary of this area, around the Bahamas and the Florida Straits. But keep in mind, the Bermuda Triangle is a legendary area, not a political one, and that its boundaries can vary widely with whoever is talking about it and with whatever they're trying to say about it. So there aren't any treaties that designate what the Bermuda Triangle is. The UN isn't going to be able to tell you what the Bermuda Triangle is because this is something that falls into the purview of either historians or speculative writers, depending. So, the Bermuda Triangle, As this graphic shows, what is popularly characterized as a triangle can vary widely in size and shape, with some authorities going so far as to state that its shape is more akin to a trapezium and that it includes the Straits of Florida and the Bahamas and stretches across the Atlantic as far as the Azores, so just 1,000 miles from mainland Europe. Others also include the entire Gulf of Mexico. So all these different shapes here represent different theorists or authors or conspiracy theorists or whatever, their concept of what the Bermuda Triangle is, for whatever reasons. So the Bermuda Triangle is, incidentally, only one of many areas in the world that have acquired a similar reputation for strange phenomena and lost vessels. There's many, many, many places like this around the world. We're most familiar with the Bermuda Triangle because we get exposed to, English language media, but there's many others, even in areas that you might not expect. Some of the others include the Dragon's Triangle, a region of the Pacific Ocean that has one of its corners around Miyake Island, about 60 miles south of Tokyo. And it is, interestingly, if you look at a map, if you look at a globe, about exactly on the other side of the planet from the Bermuda Triangle. So this has been noted as relevant by any number of people, that if you look at the area of the Dragon's Triangle, if you push a pin right through the middle of the Dragon's Triangle, it's going to come out in the Bermuda Triangle and vice versa. So very interesting that these two most ominous of areas of seaborne wrecks and disappearances are exactly opposite each other. They're antipodal to each other. There are even a number of such areas in the Great Lakes in North America, including the Marysburg Vortex, an area in eastern Lake Ontario. The Sophiasburg Triangle, also in Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario gets two of them. And the Lake Erie Quadrangle in the lake of the same name. All right, let's take a look at a few of the many, many incidents that have been associated with the Bermuda Triangle. Does anyone know, and you can just raise your hand if you think you do and I'll call on you, does anyone know when the first strange incident within the triangle was reported? Not you. You don't count. Quiet, ma'am. Yes, sir. 1947, that is a good guess. A lot of weird stuff happened in 1947, including the Roswell UFO crash. But no, it is, I will say, much earlier than 1947. Yes, sir. 1902 had a lot of interesting things, but no, let's go back even further. It's earlier than 1902. Yes, sir, in the back. The answer is, in fact, even earlier than that, but not much earlier. It's 1 year earlier than that. So if this was Price is Right, you would be tracking. As our image shows here, Christopher Columbus himself was the first person, as you alluded, to document weird occurrences in the Bermuda Triangle, reporting that he and his crew observed strange dancing lights on the horizon, flames in the sky, and bizarre compass bearings in the area. So this is all as per his logbook. So this is not an oral tradition. This is all a written, official tradition from Spanish maritime history. So, for example, a nice representative example is from his logbook entry of October 11, 1492, in which he wrote, referring to himself in the third person, "The land was first seen by a sailor, although the admiral," he's the admiral, he refers to himself as the admiral, "at 10 o'clock that evening, standing on the quarterdeck, saw a light, but so small a body that he could not affirm it to be land. Calling to Pero Gutierrez, groom of the king's wardrobe, he told him he saw a light, and bid him look that way, which he did, and saw it. He did the same to Rodrigo Sanchez of Segovia, whom the king and queen had sent with the squadron as comptroller, but he was unable to see it from his situation." So these guys are going to be around the ship keeping watch, and he's calling to a guy and saying, "I could see the light out there. Can you see it too?" "No, I can't see it from where I'm at." The admiral again perceived it once or twice, appearing like the light of a wax candle moving up and down, which some had thought an indication of land. But the admiral held it for certain that land was near. All right, here we'll take another quick survey. and this is a matter of opinion, but what is the most famous incident associated with the Bermuda Triangle? Yes, sir. Correct. You are right. It is, in fact, the 5 planes of Flight 19. You're exactly right. And they are some of the most famous for a particular reason that I will mention presently. So, a more modern incident than Columbus's weird encounters in the Bermuda Triangle, and one of the most famous associated with the area, was that of U.S. Navy Flight 19, a training flight of TBM Avenger bombers that went missing on December 5, 1945, while over the Atlantic, so right at the end of World War II. This incident was related to many people in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And many viewers may not have realized that it really occurred, minus the pilots being dropped off by a spaceship 30 years later, as far as anyone knows. But maybe not. According to the official Navy report of the incident, the 5 aircraft in this flight disappeared as the result of causes or reasons unknown. And then this little graphic that I found shows Flight 19's scheduled navigation exercise on the day it disappeared. So the number 1 there, it left Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale at 2:10 p.m. On a particular heading to drop bombs at Hen and Chicken Shoals until about 3 p.m., and then continue heading on the same heading for 73 nautical miles. They were then going to turn left to another heading, fly another 73 nautical miles. Coincidentally, they are, ironically, I guess I should say, they are describing a triangular pattern. Maybe that was their problem. And then turn left once again to yet another heading for 120 nautical miles to end their exercise north of Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale. At 17:50, so 5:50 p.m., a little before 6 o'clock, so probably pretty dusky or dark for that time of the year, radio triangulation established the flight's position to within 50 nautical miles of the point indicated by the number 4, and their last reported course, and then they weren't heard from again. And then at 1927, so about an hour and a half after the last call from Flight 19, a PBM Mariner search aircraft left Naval Air Station Banana River to go out and look for them, and at 1950 it exploded at point 6. So these 5 TBM Avenger bombers disappear. And to this day, this is a mystery. To this day, there are many theories, there are many postulations. Sometime within the last several years, and I thought this was just bizarre, sometime within the last several years, somebody found about a half dozen aircraft underwater at some point in the Bermuda Triangle. And I forget exactly where. There have been a couple of programs about this, but they found about a half dozen aircraft, and one was a TBM Avenger bomber. I mean, immediately they could tell it was a TBM Avenger bomber, and they said, "Oh my God, we found Flight 19. This is a historic event." And this is just within the last 4 or 5 years. We found a TBM Avenger bomber. Well, I checked the tail number of it, and it wasn't one of the TBM Avenger bombers from Flight 19, nor were any of the other planes in this little underwater graveyard of apparently unrelated aircraft that had all just somehow ended up within a few hundred yards of each other on the bottom of the seabed in the Bermuda Triangle. So what was baffling is not so much that Flight 19 either was or wasn't found, but there were all these other planes, and they were all clustered together in a particular spot. So that if anything, just added to the mystery and the ominousness of the whole thing. All right, we're going to look at a slightly earlier incident. So another famous incident is the one involving the naval vessel USS Cyclops, which went missing in an incident. This is interesting, I think. that resulted in the single largest loss of life in the history of the U.S. Navy not related to combat. To this day, the single largest loss of life not related to combat is USS Cyclops. Cyclops and her crew of 306 men went missing without a trace sometime after March 4, 1918, once again at the tail of World War I, after departing the island of Barbados. And it's a coal vessel, okay? It was a collier. It was carrying coal from Barbados. Storms, capsizing, and enemy activity have all been suggested as explanations, but no strong evidence exists for any of them. And there were a lot of conspiracy theories at the time as to what might have led to the disappearance of Cyclops. There was some speculation that it was sunk by a German U-boat. There was some speculation that it might have actually been sabotaged. This Commander George Worley's an interesting character. His name, strangely, I mean, you couldn't do this today in an era with social security numbers and the internet, but he was a German immigrant. He immigrated from Germany to the United States, changed his name, joined the U.S. Navy, and became captain of the Cyclops. And that all came out after the Cyclops sank. And really, you know, with, you know, all the xenophobia of that World War I era, that really created a lot of speculation that he was a German agent. And he was known as sort of a Captain Bligh-esque type character. So he was a cruel and unreasonable commander by all accounts, and none of that helped in the investigation after the disappearance of the Cyclops. So there were a lot of people at the time who thought Worley played some role in somehow surrendering Cyclops to Germany, or allowing it to be attacked by a U-boat, or just scuttling it, or whatever. But I mean, I just don't know if how credible that is or not. But that is one of the theories that was raised at the time. All right. This is a fun one. Who heard on the news within about a month and a half ago, news reports on major news networks about the SS Cotopaxi. Did anybody hear about this? Okay. Well, we'll talk about this. An interesting disappearance that has received attention recently is that of SS Cotopaxi, a tramp steamer that vanished with all hands in December 1925. Notice these things tend to happen in December. We keep coming back around in December again and again and again. So, you know, hopefully. And today's December 1st. Vanished with all hands on December 1925 while en route from Charleston, South Carolina to Havana, Cuba. So Cotopaxi was carrying a cargo of coal and a crew of 32. On December 1, it radioed a distress call and reported that it was listing and taking on water during a tropical storm, and was officially listed as overdue on December 31. So Happy New Year's. Despite the last radio transmission indicating that the ship was about to sink, she's since been connected to the legend of the Bermuda Triangle, or perhaps because of the last radio transmission indicating she was about to sink in the Bermuda Triangle. According to a story that broke earlier this year and was picked up by a number of news agencies, on May 16, the Cuban Coast Guard intercepted the unmanned Cotopaxi as it drifted toward the island of Cuba. Yeah, this was amazing, because I think we heard this like on CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley or something. And this was amazing. We said, oh my God, this is crazy, because it was gone 90 years. And then suddenly the Cuban Coast Guard intercepts it, and everybody's reporting it because it's a big deal. As exciting as this was for many of us when we heard it, the story was pretty quickly discovered to be a hoax. So there is a hoax news site out there. Looks like it's called World News Digest or something like that. I've got the URL for it. You don't need it unless you just want to read fake news. But basically, they posted this. Any number of news producers picked it up somehow, you know, through the cutting services, or the links that get sent showing potential news sources. It got reported for about 24 hours, and then everybody realized they'd been duped, and they just stopped talking about it. So Cotopaxi apparently was not discovered by the Cuban Coast Guard, unless you really do believe in conspiracy theories, in which case it was discovered by the Cuban Coast Guard, and the story has since been suppressed. But one way or the other, nobody's talking about Cotopaxi anymore. So, all right. We're now going to take a look at some of the things. We've looked at a few representative incidents associated with the Bermuda Triangle. There are many, 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 many more. There are thousands of them. But we looked at 3 that are going to be famous or high profile for whatever reasons. But we're going to look at some of the things that have been used to explain the various incidents associated with the Bermuda Triangle. So the reputation of the triangle itself has unfortunately become one of the obstacles to determining what has really happened with regard to any particular incident. And the area has become the subject of many embellishments and urban legends. And we get this in Texas a lot. I wrote a book several years back called Texas Confidential: Sex, Scandal, Murder, and Mayhem in the Lone Star State. And periodically when I tell people that, they'll say, oh, what's it about? And I'll say, well, sex, scandal, murder, and mayhem in the Lone Star State. But in my mayhem section, I included a chapter on chupacabras. And I was encountering the same sort of thing. There really is something running around in South Texas. I mean, it's a fact, called a chupacabra. It's some sort of a hybrid dog. It's probably a cross between some a Mexican desert dog called a Zolo and domestic dogs like greyhounds. So it's this bizarre, lanky-looking thing with huge fangs. She and I have seen one. My wife and I have actually seen one of these things. So we know they're real. But once you throw out that word, chupacabra, that shuts down the conversation for a lot of people. Well, you're just making stuff up, or it's just a myth, or it's just a legend, or an urban legend. This isn't true. So even though there is physically something called a chupacabra, people will say, well, you know, I don't believe in monkeys with vampire wings that suck goat's blood. Yes, well, that is one concept of a creature that gets associated with chupacabra, but then this real thing that we really do have. And then what also doesn't help is we have a local news channel in San Antonio. Anyone here from San Antonio? Okay, well, it's KSAT 12 News. And periodically they will run a chupacabra sighting story. And then the next day they'll do the retraction that it was somebody saw a raccoon with mange on a golf course. And that was the chupacabra sighting. That was real. That really happened. So conversation, meaningful conversation gets shut down. And we get that with the Bermuda Triangle. Because once you say Bermuda Triangle, people say, well, there really is no such thing, right? Well, sure, there is such a thing. It's just a matter of what it really is. So we are going to begin with some of the more verifiable or refutable explanations, naturalistic explanations, and work our way through to explanations that I'm not vouching for, but which some people have proposed and are slightly more fantastic. So, and keep in mind, we could be looking at a syndrome of things too. We could be looking at any 2 or 3 factors that are prevalent in the area of the Bermuda Triangle that, because they're operating in conjunction with each other, increase the chance of disappearances or wrecks or whatever in the area of the triangle. Okay, so. Our graphic on the left here depicts the route of the Gulf Stream, which is an ocean current that flows out of the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a current that flows out of the Gulf of Mexico, then north through the Florida Straits, and then on into the North Atlantic. In essence, it is a river within an ocean. It's a real thing. And like a river, it can and does carry floating objects with it. So a small plane making a water landing or a boat having engine trouble within the stream will quickly be carried away from its reported position by the current and thus might seem to have literally disappeared. So a vessel, a small aircraft, calls in esse position before it sinks. Searchers come out to look for it, but by the time they get there, it's disappeared because it's been carried away by the Gulf Stream. One explanation that those of you who may have heard on some of the science-ish, quasi-science shows about the Bermuda Triangle. Much more radical, naturalistic, but still naturalistic explanation for disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle has focused on the presence of vast fields of chemical compounds called methane hydrates on the continental shelves. This is, once again, a real verifiable thing. Whether it's the actual good explanation for their Bermuda Triangle losses is open to debate. So laboratory experiments, and these are neat, I've seen footage of some of these, have shown that methane hydrate bubbles can indeed sink a scale model ship by decreasing the density of the water. So the methane hydrates get released subsurface, they float up to the surface, they decrease the density of the water, a frothy, bubbly area erupts around a ship, the water can no longer support the ship, and it plummets straight beneath the waves. So this can happen. Physically, it can happen. The only question is whether it does happen. So any debris from a vessel wrecked in this way that consequently rose to the surface would rapidly be dispersed by the aforementioned Gulf Stream. So it's thus been hypothesized by some that periodic methane eruptions may produce regions of frothy water that are no longer capable of providing adequate buoyancy for ships. And if this were the case, such an area forming around a ship could cause it to sink very rapidly without warning. And we could see that on this map, there are many areas around the world that have been identified as having these deposits, and one of them is, in fact, smack dab in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. So there are, of course, logical questions one could ask. Okay, well, does this stuff happen in other areas as well? Well, you will note that there's also incidents of this right in the middle of the Dragon's Triangle off the coast of Japan as well. Sorry, I'm all over the place. I'm up here in Siberia. This is a possible explanation, one that a lot of scientists or sciencey people like because it's something that doesn't involve the supernatural. Freak waves is another explanation, and these have been known even to wreck large vessels. And it's kind of funny. Up until, past the era of World War II, really up into the 70s, freak wave was used as a euphemism for crew or captain error. If something happened to a vessel and the captain said, oh, well, it was a freak wave, he was dismissed as incompetent. He was just making something up. Freak waves were considered to be legendary for whatever reasons. It's so amazing that we have millions and millions of people living on the planet, that there would be a real thing that many people would see, but that officialdom would simply dismiss as not existing. But today, we now have footage, we now have verifiable proof that there is such a thing as a freak wave, a wave that gets generated by cross currents and just ends up coming in from a direction that wouldn't necessarily be predictable. It's sort of like a perfect storm type of thing. But a huge, deadly wave capable of sinking, I'll just say any vessel smaller than this one. So these things can happen, and by their nature, they're completely unpredictable. Or at least unpredictable as far as we're able to tell up to this point. So this is a real thing. Are they more prevalent in the Bermuda Triangle than in other areas? We know that they do occur in the Bermuda Triangle. And once again, this could be the syndrome that we're talking about. There could be any number of things that are just slightly more prevalent in the Bermuda Triangle than other areas. If you have two or three things that are slightly more prevalent, then you're going to get statistically more disappearances, more wrecks, more mystery associated with the area. Hurricanes, something most of us, have become familiar with to some extent, at least by reputation over the past several years, have also been blamed for a number of incidents related to the Bermuda Triangle. All right, now here's our last weird naturalistic possible explanation. Compass variations. Compass problems are also cited in many Bermuda Triangle incidents. Okay? The direction in which a compass needle points is known as magnetic north, okay? Which is not actually toward the North Pole precisely, but rather toward the north end of the Earth's magnetic field, which is not exactly at the North Pole. The North Magnetic Pole also wanders slightly over the years. That's a real thing. It is also certainly possible that some of the people lost in the triangle did not take these factors into account, operated according to faulty readings, and quickly became lost as a result and called in incorrect bearings when they called for help. So I remember when I joined the Army back in the 80s, and we learned about maps. We had something on every military map called, I think it was called, was it a deviation diagram, a declination diagram? There's a little diagram in the corner of the map that shows how much the magnetic north deviates from true north. So you had to take this into account when you were trying to actually shoot an azimuth and go from one point to another. So this has always been a thing. It's just that I think, only military people or mariners ever get taught about it. Most people don't know about it. Anybody can buy a boat. It's easier to actually just go out in the water in a boat than it is to drive around in a car. There's not necessarily a level of competence associated with it. So this could be playing a role in some of our disappearances. And keep in mind, the area of the Bermuda Triangle has just huge populations all around it. So there are a lot of people out on the water doing flaky things, and this is presumably leading to some of these incidents. So human error. One of the most cited explanations in official inquiries as to the loss of any aircraft or vessel in any area is human error. And we already noted that for centuries, for a couple of centuries, freak waves were just treated as legendary, not real things. Whoever saw a movie called White Squall? Oh, you ought to check that out. Was that Jeff Bridges? White Squall is a real incident. I think it's about either a U.S. Navy or U.S. Coast Guard training vessel. And basically, some horrible incident occurs to them. They get hit by this fake thing called a white squall. And as far as the officials are concerned, the captain has done something really incompetent that he doesn't want to admit to, so he's made up this whole idea of a white squall and written that off as the reason for what happened to his vessel. But this is a real, actual, historic incident that was made into this movie, and it turns out there really is something called a white squall, just like our freak waves. But people at desks in administrative areas, they never see these things. So for them, they aren't real. And it's easy to dismiss them as fake when the people who actually have experienced them are reporting them. So whether deliberate or accidental, humans have been known to make mistakes, resulting in catastrophe, and losses within the Bermuda Triangle are no exception. So any of the things that we've talked about today would just be exacerbated, would just be made worse by somebody not knowing what they were doing. Deliberate acts of destruction, including war and acts of piracy, have also been used to explain some of the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle. Records in enemy files have been checked for numerous losses, and many sinkings have been attributed to surface raiders or submarines during the world wars and documented in various command logbooks. So there are any number of vessels that have disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle or anywhere in the world that were lost because of commerce raiding. Does anyone know what commerce raiding is? Commerce raiding is an interesting phenomena. When you have a large-scale war, one of the sides is going to have naval superiority, inevitably, over the others. So, for example, during the Civil War, the Confederacy did not have a very strong navy. So they couldn't engage the Union Navy head-to-head in naval combat. So they fell back on what was called commerce raiding. They outfitted, I don't know, it might have only been about a half dozen ships, and basically they just sailed around the world as official Confederate States of America ships as pirates. I mean, use whatever word you want. That's a loaded word. From the northern point of view, they were pirates. From the southern point of view, they were commerce raiders. But what they were doing is they were attacking not U.S. naval vessels, but American flag-carrying merchant vessels. And they were capturing these ships, taking them to neutral ports and selling them for revenue that would then get turned over to the Confederate States government, looting them, sometimes burning them or sinking them if it was too difficult to get them from one point to another. So you could even have Bermuda Triangle incidents going back to the era of the U.S. Civil War that involved Confederate commerce raiders, because this is one of the areas that they were operating in. but same thing during World War I and World War II. World War II especially, Germany did not have a strong navy because after the Treaty of Versailles, after World War I, they were limited in how many ships they could have and in the size of their ships. So Germany wasn't able to have big battleships or aircraft carriers. They had what they called pocket cruisers, which were smaller vessels mostly intended for defense. But they took these pocket cruisers, Graf Spee was one of them, and it disappeared somewhere off the coast of South America in 1945, I think. But they took these pocket cruisers, these small warships, and they just sent them prowling around the world attacking merchant vessels. So everybody, I would venture to say, just about everybody knows about the German wolf packs, the U-boat packs that operated during World War II and were really, really deadly right up until about 1943, and then for various reasons diminished in their lethality. But in addition to that, Germany was using commerce raiding during World War II, and that could certainly account for any number of ships that were lost in the Bermuda Triangle over the years. And then piracy, an act which continues to this day. Many people don't know this. Piracy is real. It really happens, especially in the Red Sea, but in every body of water it happens. But the Red Sea, I think, is supposed to be about the worst place for piracy. And that's where our next big cruise is, by the way. We're going to be sailing through the Red Sea. So I'm hoping to see some pirates. And they don't say arg and wear eye patches and have parrots anymore. They're not nearly as charming. But piracy's been blamed for some incidents in the Bermuda Triangle. So drug smugglers, for example, do sometimes steal pleasure craft for smuggling operations and may have been involved in crew and yacht disappearances in the Caribbean and the Bermuda Triangle over the years.